So we're now going to move on to our next speaker, who we're looking forward to hearing from. It's Zoe Jo Rae. Zoe is a young designer and artist who has been recently living in Norway, where she's coming to us from. So I'll welcome Zoe. Is your video? Yes, there you are. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Wow, what an incredible range of presentations. This is fascinating.
I'm glad you could be there with us all day. That's great. So we're looking forward to learning more about your work, and I won't say too much because I think you're going to explain and people will understand your whole ethos on the idea of being a hunter-gatherer. So welcome.
Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. It's an incredible event that you've put together, and it's an honor to be part of it. So yeah, as Philip said, I'm now living in Norway. I'm working as a designer maker, and this ranges from community-based work to more individual practical projects. But in general, I'm engaging with projects that use design and making to open up the conversation around social and environmental issues. I'm also working part-time as a qualified arborist, or tree surgeon, as we call it in the UK, which may seem totally unrelated, but in my mind, they work perfectly together, this combination of jobs. And in small ways, tree work supplies me with a material resource, which currently is coming together into a project of storytelling objects, exploring the trees around Oslo and mapping them out through small pieces of furniture and artifacts. And in a bigger way, they're both professions are labors of love. So not just work, but an ethos which informs the way that I live my life. So I'm just gonna try sharing my screen with you now. There we go. Okay, just shout if there's any technical issues and you're not following. So I'm fascinated by the evolving relationship that we as humans have with matter and with our environment and materials and with waste. So today I'm here to tell you about a project I did a couple of years ago, but it's a project which still very much informs my practice, and it's called Hunter-Gatherer in the Anthropocene. And it's a speculative design project which applies a hunter-gatherer mindset to some of the contemporary issues of our time. So the objects I've created are responses to the unique threats posed by this world of the Anthropocene that we live in. And my research explored the three disconnects that characterize this epoch. So firstly, the abundance of waste materials that exist outside of natural ecosystems. The second is the loss of cultural narratives and the creation of homogenized archaeologies caused by the global standardization of our material world. And this leads to the third disconnect, which is the loss of practical resourcefulness caused by an overdependency on technology. So these disconnects speak to the loss of the hands-on, of knowledge, of understanding, of skills, of craft, and with that, cultures, and the respect for what it means to create something. And this becomes hard to relate to when so many of us no longer have any part in the making process of the objects that we own. So to explore these vast topics, I created a series of artifacts that provide a critical, experimental, and speculative insights into the evolving human relationships with our natural environment. So the research was both hands-on and theoretical. So alongside the physical experimentation, I became pretty obsessed with authors and journalists such as George Monbiot and Barry Lopez, and consumed hundreds of National Geographical articles. But this quote by George Monbiot, I feel, captures a little of an aspect of how these disconnects occur. So I'm just going to read that quickly. It is no longer rare to meet adults who have never swum except in a swimming pool, never slept except in a building, have never been stung by a bee or a wasp, broken a bone, or needed stitches. Without visceral knowledge, we lose our reference points. We are separated from the world by a layer of glass. Climate change, distant wars, and erosion of democracy in our temperature-controlled enclosures all can be reduced to abstractions. So with that in mind, I wanted to create a project that existed at the meeting place between design and anthropology. So I decided to set it in the context of a National Geographical style article, which follows this hunter-gatherer character living alongside consumers and utilizing their waste streams. This enabled me to comment on and document the cultures and rituals that started to evolve throughout the process. Framing this project in this well-known and understood format kind of provided me with a lens with which to view and engage the work, where the connections between designer and product become more human and artifact. So the materials might be new, but the mindset I was going to apply to them was about 2.5 million years old. And in order for this project to work, I couldn't be viewing this character from the outside. For a project focusing on disconnect, this was far too disconnected. So I had to become the individual, building this relationship with these materials. And in doing so, I had to rewild my own design process and forage for materials, move out of the workshop, and engage with an intuitive making process. I had to become the hunter-gatherer. So my material choices were dictated by what was available within walking distance, and by abundance of material, in the same way as is for our ancestors. However, at the time I was based in Brighton, and there was a lot less antelope and birch bark and a lot more coffee shops. So that became an abundant waste material resource, and my hunting ground. So it provided me with milk bottles, coffee bags, flour bags, and I also foraged for other materials within the local area, which included coppiced sycamore, waste metal, and the rubber from the inside of bike tires. And as a maker, or perhaps craftsman is a better word in this context, I'm drawn to natural materials, to woods, to fibers, stone and clay, and they have an animism. No two stones or pieces of wood are the same. So they're part of the natural world, just like us, but processed and synthetic materials like plastic, they're different and they didn't naturally engage me. So I was going to have to work at it. And for a start, I didn't really like plastic. So it was going to be a challenge. But I felt that practically, I could create something from these materials. So it was more, could I inject them with animism? Could I realize their value and illustrate their potential as materials with emotional durability? Could I fall in love with these materials? And the answer was yes. And in just the same way that our ancestors learned the history-changing potential of flint by experimenting, shaping and molding and developing skills and cultivating knowledge, and a language of craft around them. So first I had to ask, what are the materials of the Anthropocene? Where do I find them? How do I hunt them and process them and prepare them? And this would be about experimentation. There are hundreds of books and you can be taught about how to work with wood. But I quickly found out that the same was not true for HDPE, which is the material that milk bottles are made from. But I figured if I could fall a bit in love with milk bottles, despite smelling of rancid milk consistently during the months of experimentation, I felt like anyone could. And as I worked with these bottles, finding the best way to cut them and get the most out of each bottle, and separating the thicker plastic of the handle and the lid rim and the lids, and heat pressed into sheets and laboriously heated them, the seams to make bigger sheets, I found that these seemingly lifelike, homogeneous bottles took on a life of their own. They became the animal skins of the Anthropocene. So my first move away from seeing these items purely as trash was to get to know them based on their material properties. So their flexibility, their stone-like, skin-like qualities, bendability, softness, etc. And it was the qualities of the material that would very much define the function. So the kayak came about as a kind of research vehicle, a physical research vehicle, a point from which to work from. And while in many ways the kayak is an ancient object that was first documented around 4,000 years ago, it has a timelessness to it. And it could traverse the rising sea levels of the Anthropocene and leave no trace. And so it felt like a natural choice. And the frame of the kayak was made using a coppiced sycamore, which was a waste material being cut down in a local woodland. Sycamore grows like a weed in the UK. So this provided me with the kayak frame. And anyone who knows a bit about bending wood may know that sycamore is not necessarily the best choice, but with some failures and testing of breaking points, it was possible. So an underlying ethos that set the tone for much of the making process is the mindset of useful. The idea that everything has a use, you have to find it. And Barry Lopez speaks at length about this in his book, Arctic Dreams. I'm just going to read a quick quote from him as he sums this up very well. The Inuit utilized the caribou completely. They made clothing, bedding, and bags from its skin, and tools and weapons from its bone and antlers, noting that the fats in the caribou leg joints congealed at lower temperatures, the further they were from the body core. They took the fat from the foot as a lubricant for the bowstrings in freezing temperatures. They used the marrow bone for fuel, its blood in glues, its sinews for lashing, bindings, and thread. So in order to prove the value of these waste objects I was using, I decided that once I'd picked one up and chosen it, I would waste nothing. Within our human history, this is an ethos born from necessity, from a fight for survival that many of us in the privileged positions no longer encounter within our everyday. But along with resourcefulness, I believe the mindset of useful is an incredibly useful tool that has the potential to challenge our 24/7 consumer culture. So the paddle required a harder material for the paddle blades, and this for this I employed a technology which dates back to about 4000 BC, and it's casting. Only I wouldn't be casting metal like our ancestors, it would be plastic. So I used the harder sections of the milk bottles that I'd cut away while making the skin, as they weren't suitable for the skin, and these came into their own in this process. So I carved a wooden mold, and HDPE has a very low melting point, so I was able to heat it enough to melt it into this mold and end with a cast, which was a solid bone-like material which wouldn't flex when pulled through water. And the addition of a sycamore handle meant that it would float on the surface of water if dropped. So it quickly became evident that due to working with unconventional materials, I would not only need to develop my own technique, but also tools in order to process and work with these materials. So I researched the different blades that we have used throughout human history, from early flint to the ulu knife, which is a rounded blade with a handle on top, which is still used among Inuit communities and is passed down through generations of women. And the knife that I would need to slice milk bottles had to fit snugly in the hand and be efficient, as the process of skinning milk bottles was a laborious one for the kayak. There was about over 300 milk bottles used in that kayak. So I decided to use a recycled metal sandwiched between 2 slabs of HDPE, which formed my milk bottle knife. The wooden frame of the kayak required the bark to be stripped off of the saplings, and in order to do that, I'd need a draw knife. So the woodland where the sycamore was sourced is located on a piece of land that has long been used for a dumping ground for motorbikes. And this provided a harvesting opportunity. The circular shape of the brake plate provided the perfect blade of the draw knife, and the handle was then wrapped with the inner tubing from a disused bike tire, adding grip and reducing rubbing on the palm of the hand during use. So skins and furs that have been used throughout our history to cover us were once obviously part of living, breathing animals. And this gives them remarkable qualities that demand respect and require a specific knowledge in the preparation and working of the material. And within the clothing for the hunter-gatherer of the Anthropocene, it needed to be kayak-worthy and waterproof and flexible enough to move around in. So I had to hunt down these materials with the specific qualities. So for the trousers, I decided on flour bags, as it's a lightweight material that was fairly tough and warm to the touch. And it can also be waxed to give a waterproof finish. And despite being man-made, its qualities echoed that of the natural animal skin or oil skin. So this slightly sci-fi looking object was the jacket. And coffee bags are a nightmare in the UK as they do not fit into many of the traditional recycling systems, as they're 3 materials fused together, paper, a metal foil, and a plastic. But this made a perfect material for a waterproof, durable jacket, as it retains warmth as well. And I found that coffee bags could be fused, applying heat to the seam, which resulted in a waterproof seam. So I also realized that while I was out gathering all my materials, I desperately needed a gathering bag. And I wanted something which was kind of shell-like, so that I could carry the knives around in it without them breaking through a softer or more woven material. So I experimented with egg trays, which came from the same resource as the milk bottles, the cafes, and the result was a durable and lightweight material, which I bound together using water and flour, which was left over in the flour bags from making the trousers. And this created a dough which could then be molded and formed and heated to create a solid shell, which was then stitched together using recycled electrical wiring. So cultural objects might not have an obvious practical function, but they're vastly significant in creating and responding to a community's cultural identity. And within human history, these objects or drawings often mimic the local wildlife. So this became a framework for the cultural objects of the Anthropocene. And milk bottles and flour bags were used to create these playful objects that were unrefined and were not designed to be a replica of the animal, but capture an essence, almost childlike, like kind of cave paintings. And it's interesting to consider the impact of these objects, that they have as a storytelling tool, and they really kind of bring together the world of the Anthropocene in this narrative. While the other artifacts have an obvious use, these material animals begin to suggest how these hunter-gatherers might view and interpret their world in the same way that archaeological artifacts help us build an image of our ancestors and their lives and routines and rituals and what they might have looked like. So This project doesn't aim to glorify the hunter-gatherer existence, and neither does it suggest that we all start building milk bottle kayaks. I'm under no illusion that recycling alone is not the answer, but I do believe that many of the objects I own, I have created not because I am a designer, but because I'm a human. And we've spent thousands of years refining the hands-on skills and knowledge, and have created a resourcefulness and resilience that has ensured our survival to date. This knowledge is endangered along with the communities around the globe which still live by it. So how do we now, in the 21st century, with all the new tools of industrialization and globalization and technology, reintroduce this mindset of resourcefulness and re-engage with our planet? Thank you.
Zoe, I'm speechless, I'm emotional. I'm so happy I found you, because I found your booklet when I was in the jury of Rosanna Orlandi for the Guiltless Plastic. The first one, so that's 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And you only sent in this very nice, beautiful book with beautiful drawings. And I just knew I had something very amazing and remarkable in my hands. I couldn't get the jury to understand this little book. There was no plastic inside. But since that moment, I wanted to reach out to you, and it was very hard to find you, actually. And so I'm so grateful that we had the opportunity of doing the exhibition in Lille, so we could finally, get in touch, really.
Absolutely.
I want to stay in touch. I think that it's very, very important what you do. Very, very, very important for the world. And we're going to try to help you as much as we can. And I think, yeah, you are a true World Hope Forum sort of hero. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to have been involved and been asked to take part, and very nice to virtually meet you finally.
Keep us in touch with what you're doing next, because we are really interested.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zoe.